I'm just going to add some facts and figures about part of what Russ said, principally about how many primates there are, and also a little bit more detail about the status of the primates on the IUCN Red List, our assessments of their conservation. Now, whoops, doesn't want to, hold on, how do you do it? There we go. So I'm going to talk about two things: the numbers of primate species and why the numbers have increased so much since 2000, as mentioned by Russ. And also what's happening with the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species and the current status of the primates we have at present in Asia, Africa, Madagascar, and the Neotropics. So here we have the details of the numbers of primates. As you can see, the Neotropics win in terms of the numbers of species. Two quite separate radiations, the Platyrrhini and the Catarrhini in the Old World. And with that, we now have, in the Neotropics particularly, 176 species and 216 species and subspecies. As you can see there, Mesoamerica, Russ mentioned, has got 9 of those species and 19 species and subspecies, all very particular to to Mesoamerica, and all now quite seriously endangered. So here we have a graph which shows the numbers of primate species people estimated since 1896, there was a book by Forbes, where we had 263 primate species. This is just species, I'm not including the subspecies. And as you can see, that went up quite seriously in the early 20th century by Daniel Giraud Elliott, who basically did a count of type specimens. He went through type specimens and decided which were valid and which weren't. It was not a particularly comparative study in the sense of looking at variation among species. But he estimated the number of 532, quite a considerable increase. So what we ask here is why the number dropped over the next 50 years to, in 1967, when Napier in their classic book on the Handbook of Primates had decided there were only about 180 species. And you can see from this graph, which I'll try to indicate, that the number of species remained low right through the 1990s until the end of the 1990s, when it just started to pick up. And that was largely due, I mean, we had an all-time low with Jacqueline Wolfheim, who indicated 151 species. And this started to grow really because of Colin Groves, who started showing an interest in these animals in the late 1990s and started to increase the number of species recognized by the scientific community. Now you can see we have, when we published the Handbook of the Mammals of the World, we reckoned there were 503 species. That was in 2013. With species being lost and species being gained, some are synonymized, but some more are gained, we now have 521 species, including one which was described, where the publication came out and described only 4 days ago, which was a langur in Myanmar, described by Christian Roos and quite a number of colleagues in the journal Zoological Research. So we can ask why the increasing numbers of species and subspecies of primates. There are 4 main aspects. One is species concepts, another is new species, then there's taxonomic revisions and field research, and finally, a very important one, molecular genetics. Perhaps the most important concerns our idea of what is a species. So the species rank, if you think about it, in the taxonomic hierarchy is unique because it's the only one which has really a biological reality. All the others are just grouping them or organizing them into different groups, smaller and larger groups. In the species rank, though, you have the actual mechanism of gene flow and evolution. So we try to work out that these are real and distinct entities in nature, and they represent the evolving lineages that define diversity. And I can once again say a very interesting, fascinating report on this was produced by Alfie Rosenberg in his most recent book, as you saw, as was shown by Russ. The problem, however, is, and we still haven't really worked it out, is how to recognize or define them, how to recognize what is a species and what is not a species. That is a perennial question, and more than 30 species concepts have arisen over the last 20, 30 years and before. But really, perhaps the most important are these three, which I list here with their definitions. The first one, the polytypic species principle, as it was so called, created by Lydecker and colleagues. Julian Huxley was involved, and Julian Huxley or Thomas Huxley? I got confused now. Anyway, that is what happened with that great decline you can see from the early 1900s onwards, most particularly because illustrated by Ernst Schwartz, who decided that all primates could be classed as one representative species, with a capital S, and all its variation illustrated as subspecies. And so you got situations where a large number of subspecies were available, but for example, only one species for all the variation you had. And that reduced it from what? 532 described by Eliot down to about 180 in 1967, which is where we have the first proper list produced by Prue Napier and her husband, John Napier. Now with that, we had ongoing during the oops, something terrible there. During the 1900s, where you had predominant was Ernst Mayer's biological species concept. Now with that, he described it in terms of the capacity of one individual to reproduce with another. And he defined them as groups of actually or potentially interbreeding natural populations, a key word, which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. The problem there, though, is that this was all very fun, but all of you, I'm sure, have realized that often you'll see lions will breed with tigers, and you'll find that in nature, you've got these hybrid zones. How do you deal with those? Do they immediately extinguish any possibility of two populations being a species, being each a species, if they interbreed? Now, this it also becomes a severe problem when you've got animals which are physically isolated. Animals on islands, animals which are divided by rivers, who have no possibility to interbreed. So this nullifies, essentially, the concept as being useful for defining what is a species and what is not a species. So these two species don't interbreed. They're isolated by mountain ranges or by being from one end going, being one end, being in Mesoamerica, the other in the Amazon. Are they different species? It doesn't help. So allopatric populations being defined as species using this concept is void. So what you've got a lot of the way through with this biological species concept is people saying it's a concept which involves the reasoning as follows. These animals are so different, they must be separate species. which is not scientifically very sound. Now, curiously enough, that does lead into the third, which has become particularly popularized, let's say, by the faith of Colin Groves, who's had a tremendous influence on mammal species as a whole in increasing from each other and from other such clusters among the species, let's say, and within which there is a parental pattern of ancestry and descent. So they're heritable lineages. And he changed this eventually to the diagnosable lineage concept. Lineages eventually became the key for defining species. And this has been reinforced by the incredible capacity of genetics in this modern age to distinguish lineages and even work out how old they are when they first separated from other lineages. So this phylogenetic species concept is, above all, useful because it is a hypothesis which is testable. Is this species different from that species? Why is it, how is it different? Is that difference heritable? Now, of course, you have always a little bit of subjectivity as to what is a significant diagnosable difference. But we'll just leave it at that for the moment. Some think that not having a thumb is, whereas the other population does have a thumb, is significant. Other people do not. Having a slightly different colored fur is probably not significant. So this emphasizes you must check carefully what is the variation within each species. So this has brought to the fore the importance of subspecies and the importance of gauging carefully over a certain range the consistency of the presence of this diagnosable characteristic which you're using to define this lineage. The next one, of course, is new species. As Russ mentioned, 96 primates just since the year 2000. And that only includes the ones which actually succeeded and not been synonymized. But you can see that the large concentration and very much through genetics was the lemurs, which increased in their numbers to 112 since 2020, with 52 species being recognized. Mainland Africa, 7 species, Asia 16, and Neotropics did pretty well early on in the 2000s, producing 21 new species, although there are still new species out there. And here are some examples. Above is the black snub-nosed monkey from Myanmar, Pithecia piscinacii from the Amazon, named after Alcides piscinaci, a new type of relation of the owl monkey in the Congo, and also Russ has shown this one, Caerogalis shethi, a dwarf lemur from northern Madagascar. In all, 62 prosimians, 30 monkeys, 3 gibbons, and 1 orangutan. That includes the langur described fairly recently. The third one, of course, obviously, is taxonomic revisions and field research. An example, just little examples, a review by Laura Marsh, published in 2014. She worked over about 10 years going through museums and checking the variation found in these Sarki monkeys, and increased the number of species from 5 recognized by Hershkovitz in 1987 to 2014. This is a purely morphological approach. She looked at skins, basically, pelage coloration, and to some extent cranial morphology. And this might well be reduced eventually when we get the other side of the coin, which is looking at the phylogenetics, which might reduce the numbers and might increase as well the numbers of Sarki monkeys. The last one, fourth one, is molecular genetics. Just as an example, Jean Boubly took a serious look at the genetics of the phylogenetics of the capuchin monkeys and increased the numbers from Groves in 2005, who recognized 4 species and a few subspecies, to 15 species. And with that, I think I'm rather proud of myself in a sense, in that a number of the northern Colombian subspecies described by Hershkovitz in 1949 were completely abandoned and forgotten about, and nobody really thought they were valid. And I kept them on our taxonomic list, and eventually they came out as an extraordinary cluster of species, not even subspecies. So you can see there a considerable increase in the number of species just from genetic analysis. Another one, Jean Boubly also carried out with his brilliant student, Hazel Byrne, you're looking at the Sarki monkeys, and they tied up, the phylogenetic analysis tied up very well with Kobayashi in the 3 groups, in the groups that he recognized, but combined the Cupreus group and the Molo group in the Amazon, distinguished very clearly the earliest radiation of the earliest divergence of Titi monkeys, the collared Titis or Torquatus group, and separated out very clearly the Titi monkeys in the Atlantic forest of Brazil. These separations were old enough that we decided to place them in distinct species, in distinct genera. So Calicebus was the oldest name. There were no other names for the collared Titis or the Amazonian Titis, the Cupreus and Moloch groups. So we created these new genera to take this into account. The Torquatus group separated off from the other Titi monkeys 11 million years ago. And the Atlantic forest Titi monkeys, Personatus, and the Amazonian Titi monkeys separated about 7.5 million years ago. So this has also given us a very clear understanding of this extraordinary radiation of now 34 species, and has allowed us to classify them, I reckon, I believe, more clearly into their 3 groups as distinct genera. So, how are we doing for time? Probably not very well. What I'd like to go into now quickly is the red list, where we're at, let's say. The categories and criteria used to assess the conservation status of species are now widely accepted. These were created by Georgina Mace and her colleagues in the late 80s and 90s, and it identifies species that are threatened. Right away, this directly influences investment in endangered species programs, both in situ and ex situ. This represents an awful lot of money, and this shows how serious this list is in terms of influencing investment in conservation as such. But it's not just a list, it's an index. You can use the assessments to look at trends. Taxonomic trends, which are the groups most threatened, spatial trends, where primates are more threatened, and look at temporal changes, changes in the extinction of the status of the different primates. So a measure of biodiversity loss and conservation success can be based on changes in the red list. As such, it's used to identify trends for taxonomic groups, for species relevant to particular policy mechanisms, on continents, in regions or biogeographic realms, in different ecosystems and habitats, and in the importance and impacts of the threats themselves. This means you get, with this evaluation, not of just of primates, of course, but the fauna worldwide and flora, quite a clear understanding of what's happening and it's usually disastrous to the wildlife and flora of the world. Ross mentioned the global mammal assessment. It was a massive effort to have all the mammals assessed in one go, which was published in 2008. For the primates, 634 taxa, that includes the subspecies, were assessed, and 49% of them were found to be threatened. In Africa, 37%, in Madagascar, 41%, in Asia, 71%, and in the Neotropics, 40%. You can see already there the serious situation in Asia, particularly because you've got basically deforestation, heavy trade in primates, and hunting particularly is very severe, not just for food, but also for the traditional Chinese medicine. So to go from there, we tried to set up a system where we could produce a new list, update them all. And as you see, there were a number of workshops carried out. Now, the important thing is here, just to say about the workshops, is that they were carried out with great enthusiasm. But the actual assessments, getting them published on the red list, did delay somewhat and is still going on. So in this IUCN red list, the most recent posting, they post all the assessments, well, they post new assessments in 2 blocks during the year, one in the early part of the year and the other in the middle of the year. The most recent posting, let's say, update, was in July of this year. And look what's happened to the primates. All primates have increased quite considerably and is now totaling, unfortunately, 62% of all the primates are threatened. In Africa, you've got 51%. In Madagascar, you have a very serious situation where nearly all the lemurs are now considered threatened. The results here are slightly different from the others because there was a repeat workshop in 2012 and another one again in 2018. The reason why there were further workshops or further assessments done on these was because the 2008 assessment included more than 40 species which were evaluated as data deficient. So now we see that 95% of the lemurs are threatened. And what we have is a situation where basically the lemurs are going from vulnerable to endangered to critically endangered. And it's a very serious situation. And we can credit Russ, frankly, for enormous efforts, enormous fundraising efforts, and enormous efforts in all aspects to help save this critically endangered entire group of primates. Asia, again, is in a bad situation with 46%, but the Neotropics as well has remained fairly similar to what it was before. I think it was 36 before in 2008. I got the comparison here. 2008 to 2022, you can see that the change has been 137 more primates now listed as threatened. And in the Neotropics, only 14 more listed as threatened. It went from 40 to 43%. So well done, the Neotropics. They're doing pretty well compared to other countries, but that doesn't mean that there should be any complacence. So in the Neotropics, we now have 43% which are threatened. Note here, however, that not all the Neotropical primates and not all the Asian primates have yet been updated. The numbers we have today, quite a number of them, 96 of the Neotropical primates are still the 2008 assessments. 89 of the Asian primates are still 2008 assessments. So it's still not an accurate reflection of how things have changed from 2008 to 2020. There will be another posting on the 31st of December Again, not all the Neotropical primates or Asian primates will be posted now and then, but quite a lot more will. There will be quite an increase in numbers. We have a lady called Kim Reuter, who might have contacted you, who is working very hard to try and push these through. Now, why this is delayed so much is not entirely, I think, due to complete laziness on the part of anybody. One of the problems, I think, which needs to be addressed in the future is there is an enormous amount of information now. In the past, there was very much less information, and it was easier with less information to just make a decision of some sort. Now, there's so much information, so much research, so many surveys, and things are also happening so much faster. The threats are so much bigger and also accessible, so more accessible, so you have to try to understand the threats. The information you have to compile and collate and put together to understand the threats of these species is now a complicated and serious task. And that's good in a way, because we're dealing with much more information to make these assessments. And they will be, for that reason, much more accurate, much more informative, because you will know more clearly what the threats are, where they are, where the populations are that are threatened, and how you can carry out actions to try and save these animals. My last slide is just to show what's happening in Mesoamerica. Those with the asterisks are still the 2008 assessments, unfortunately. Hopefully this will be addressed fairly soon. It's often because another aspect of why the red list is more difficult, let's say now, is because the regulations, the definitions, the criteria are very strict and they need to be addressed. And all too often, a beautiful assessment is sent in to IUCN, but it is examined and seen as incoherent or not quite complete and is then returned. And this exactitude, this concern for detail and accuracy is entirely laudable. So for Mesoamerica, you've got 9 species and 19 species, 16 are threatened. That's critically endangered, endangered, or vulnerable, and 11 are now endangered. That's critically endangered or endangered. And all I can do is say, let us hope that we can continue the good work, let's say, and as the Primate Specialist Group's mission is, try to stop, avoid extinction, and secure perhaps smaller but healthy populations. Okay, I'm afraid I might have gone way over my time, but that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rylands. It was really nice to hear you, and also Mr. Russell Mittermeier. Both of you answered me already several questions I have written down for you. So, but I'm really impressed for the situation of the howler monkeys, because they used to be less concerned, and now they turned it vulnerable as a taxa and in danger. And this is very worried. And what can you recommend for us to start conservation activities as quickly as possible? What do you recommend for young primatologists that are starting their career and will be interested to do something for that?
Bueno, muy rápidamente, todo eso depende de ustedes, ¿no? Ustedes viven en los países donde están las poblaciones de estos primates. Nosotros podemos ayudar hasta los límites de nuestra capacidad, y tenemos ciertos fondos, no son muy grandes, pero especialmente para estimular el interés de los primatólogos jóvenes. Yo creo que hay mucho que puede ser hecho, y estamos dispuestos a ayudar de la manera y dentro de nuestros límites de lo que podemos hacer, vamos a hacer. Hay ciertas cosas interesantes en Mesoamérica. todavía creo que tenemos que esclarecer un poco el estatus de los satélites, ¿no? Porque estamos baseando nuestra imagen de las especies y subespecies en México y en América Central en publicaciones bastante antiguas. Y hay una especie, por ejemplo, que todavía es un misterio, que es Atelis fusciceps rufiventris de la frontera con Panamá y Colombia. Y nos interesa muchísimo. Si hay alguien que quiere hacer un proyecto sobre este animal, sería muy bienvenido.
Thank you very
Pedro,
much. Go ahead.
Pedro has sent me an article about it. I'm working on it.
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain something else, Dr. Rylands, about this question, or you want me to follow with another one?
Well, I'd just like to add that I think you ask what younger and starting and primatologists can do. Don't ever underestimate the need for surveys. I've written several times about this, and it's something it's not too difficult to do. You just got to get there and go there and carry out a survey. Some people think this is just, it's not hard science and it's whatever. But it is one of the most fundamental contributions to understanding the status of these species in all senses. Yeah. If you can know your populations, if you can know where they occur, you can set up the capacity to affect them by parks or by community programs, community awareness, and so on. Surveys, understanding how many there are and where they are, is really fundamental for conservation initiatives.
Anthony tiene toda razón con eso, porque muchas veces los primatólogos más viejos dicen que ya tenemos suficiente información, ya sabemos todo, no necesita más surveys. No es el caso. En cada región, en cada país donde hay primates, necesitamos todavía surveys para esclarecer más lo que hay en términos de estos animales en la naturaleza. Y nosotros tenemos un interés especial en apoyar más surveys en el futuro. Si puedo, Pedro, rápidamente, yo vi en el chat varias preguntas, especialmente sobre la involucración de las comunidades locales. Y
claro.
yo vi una pregunta de Lucerene, por ejemplo, sobre ecoturismo de primates y las comunidades locales. La cosa más importante con ecoturismo de primates es la participación de las comunidades, porque básicamente si no tenemos el apoyo y el entusiasmo de las comunidades locales, no importa lo que hacemos en nuestras pesquisas o el nivel del gobierno, ellos tienen que apoyar y tener beneficios de la conservación, del ecoturismo, todo lo que queremos conseguir con los primates en el futuro. Los socios más importantes para nosotros son las comunidades locales, sean indígenas, sean otras comunidades locales. Eso para mí es una prioridad altísima para el futuro.
Doctor Mittermeier, hay muchas personas que intentan atraer el turismo utilizando alimento para atraer a los monos. Me pregunto qué piensa al respecto, si esto es positivo o es negativo.
Preferimos no hacer eso, porque yo creo que eso crea una dependencia. No es tan difícil habituar los primates si uno dedica el tiempo a hacerlo. Y yo creo que es mucho mejor tener primates totalmente natural, poblaciones totalmente natural, en lugar de hacer darles comida. Nosotros como, ¿cómo se dice? Nuestra prioridad en el ecoturismo es no hacer eso. En ciertos casos está siendo hecho, por ejemplo, en China se hace mucho de eso, ¿no? pero tiene el caso de gorila de montaña o lo que estamos haciendo con 112 especies en Madagascar, nada de provisioning, ¿no? Nada de comida para traerlos. Entonces, preferimos mucho que no se hace eso.
Gracias, Dr. Mittermeier. Okay, I have a question here. How being endemic or genetically different made the difference in a conservation compared with vulnerable species that are getting worse in their environment, but they are in several countries? Es básicamente sobre qué diferencia hay en la conservación o el procedimiento de conservación de una especie que es endémica a otra que está en un nivel crítico, pero está en varios países.
Bueno, depende de caso por caso, ¿no? Depende mucho. Obviamente, si una especie es endémico y críticamente amenazado, solamente existe en un país, es una gran prioridad, pero no quiere decir que las especies que están críticamente amenazado o amenazado en diferentes países también es importante para los países que tienen esas poblaciones. Entonces, tenemos que hacer las decisiones basado en la situación de cada una de estas especies. Nosotros no queremos perder nada de la diversidad de primates. Entonces, para mí, todo que nos ayuda en evitar extinciones es una prioridad.
Dr. Mittermeier, ¿qué puede decir sobre la categoría Near Threatened?
A mí no me gusta. A mí no me gusta Near Threatened y no me gusta tampoco Data Deficient. Data Deficient, yo creo que si tenemos un mínimo de información, tenemos que hacer una decisión si es vulnerable, amenazado, críticamente amenazado. Y Near Threatened para mí, yo no uso casi. Yo prefiero o least concern o vulnerable.
Gracias.
Anthony tal vez tiene otra opinión, pero para mí Near Threatened no es muy interesante.
What do you think, Dr. Rylands?
Well, near threatened is like putting it into the waiting room before you go to the doctor. They're not quite sure it's vulnerable. But it's what happens if in the past, before the red list categories and criteria were set up, it would be a matter of Ross perhaps reading letters from people or in Africa or in Central America, and they say this is dreadfully threatened. And it would then go in as threatened. So this is a more, it's an attempt, and a very laudable attempt, a successful attempt in the most part, to structure it so that everybody's talking the same language in terms of the degree of threat to each of these species. But it makes for regulations, as they always do. It makes it quite tricky. So you do get situations where people will insist that this is critically endangered, but it does not quite fit into the regulations, into the category. It does not have quite the criteria to fit in. And that is always a slight disadvantage. We're having a bit of trouble now with a Titi monkey in Bolivia, Plecturus sebus olali, which they are absolutely convinced is critically endangered in all aspects. And the evidence indicates that it can't quite fit into that category. Well, that's just the problem of having things regulated. I mean, that is true in all our lives. I mean, there's no nuance, let's say, when you've got these strict regulations.
Thank you, Dr. Rylands. What about the green list, which is kind of a positive way to put species that have been critically endangered and now probably get something better? How can we manage this information?
Anthony, you want to respond to that? Uno de los jefes del grupo que está organizando este Green List es Barney Long, que hace parte de nuestra organización. Si ustedes quieren más detalles sobre lo que hace el Green List, yo puedo establecer un contacto entre ustedes y Barney. Pero Anthony, ¿yo quiere comentar?
Well, I think, you know, it's very good. It's a complicated list at the moment, to some extent, in that it comes back to the red list index to some extent, where you want to see favorable outcomes. They're looking for measuring favorable outcomes for conservation measures. But these do take an awful long time. And so it's not a very dynamic list in a way. But I think it's admirable to do this, to show the animal, show which species are eventually becoming more secure under whatever circumstances. But you take, for example, the golden lion tamarin, which is on your poster. That has had nearly 40 years now of conservation effort. After about 30, it was changed from critically endangered to endangered with enormous investment. And yet, to what extent is that really secure when you suddenly get these stochastic events such as yellow fever and all of a sudden an explosion of the golden-headed lion tamarin in Niteroi and in Rio, which hasn't affected this population, but was about to, and has involved an extraordinary effort over nearly 5 years now to capture them all. And that's nearly 1,000, I think it's 1,000 individuals now that have been captured, spreading fast towards the range, what is the rest of the range of the golden lion tamarins. And thank goodness for, I'll give a call out for Cecilia Kierulf, who has managed to catch these animals. In many other situations with wildlife, if you get there too late, it's done. For example, gray squirrels in Switzerland, in the Italian Alps. They waited too long, and then they couldn't address the situation because there were too many gray squirrels, eliminating the red squirrels, which are native to that. So, you know, all of a sudden, we're coming back to it becoming critically endangered. These, you know, you can't be complacent and think, right, we've done that job, let's move on to the next. All need surveys to check constantly how the populations are doing.
Thank you very much.
No hay victorias finales en la conservación, es siempre una lucha y una vez que piensas que todo está bien, viene otro.
Algo pasa.
Como el caso de Madagascar en 2008, yo estaba preparando una publicación diciendo que Madagascar es un éxito incipiente de la conservación, an incipient success story. Y 3 meses después tuvo un coup d'état y todo cambió a través de los próximos 10 años para lo peor, ¿no? Entonces, eso es siempre una lucha y no podemos nunca estar, ¿cómo se dice? Complacentes, ¿se dice eso en español? Yo veo, pero otra pregunta aquí en el chat. Estoy mirando un poco el chat y muchos...
Thank you for that. Yeah, it was very difficult for me to manage because several questions and several greetings from different parts of Latin America.
Yeah, so, but por ejemplo, una pregunta de Costa Rica que dice que es posible establecer un primate watching en un país que solamente tiene 4 especies, pero Costa Rica es fantástico en términos de ecoturismo, es un modelo para el mundo y los primates son muy fáciles de ahí. Entonces, ¿por qué no juntar primate watching con bird watching, que es una gran industria allá en Costa Rica? Entonces, sí, solamente tienen 1 o 2 especies o 4 o 5, o como el caso de Panamá, un poco más diverso en términos regionales. Siempre hay posibilidades de tener primate watching como una mini industria que trae muchos beneficios a las comunidades locales y a los primates mismos.
Gracias, Dr. Mittermeier. Si alguien quiere comentar algo brevemente con el micrófono para que todos tengamos oportunidad, pueden hacerlo.
Otra pregunta importante es, yo mostré la imagen de cambio climático, ¿no? Diciendo que es una gran amenaza, pero al mismo tiempo una oportunidad. Y digo que es una oportunidad porque estamos ahora empujando mucho, y especialmente en el país, en mi país ahora, que finalmente después de 4 años de desastre, vamos a tener un presidente que es consciente del problema de cambio climático, porque en los últimos 4 años Trump fue una vergüenza nacional. Y espero que no haya republicanos en este evento, lo dudo, ¿no? Pero lo que estamos empezando a entender siempre mejor que es conservación y restauración de los bosques tropicales. Representa por lo menos 30% de la solución a los cambios climáticos. Entonces, si podemos establecer modelos de compensación a los países que están protegiendo los bosques tropicales y restaurando los bosques tropicales, eso va a ser una ayuda, una gran ayuda a nuestros esfuerzos de conservación, porque puede traer recursos en una escala bien mayor, bien más grande de lo que tenemos en este momento. Y creo que con este gobierno de Biden y Harris vamos a tener mucho interés en cambio climático en general, pero también en estos nature-based solutions.
We have hopes.
Yeah,
Esperemos que sí. Aprovechar, por favor, si alguien quiere comentarle algo a Dr. Rylands o Dr. Mittermeier, puede hacerlo por el micrófono. De otra forma, ok.
Ok, buenos días, Ruth y Anthony. Un placer estar en esta charla, una excelente charla. Tenía una pregunta corta para Ruth sobre el monkey watching. Estamos interesados en realizar un proyecto de ese tipo en Costa Rica. Ya hemos hablado con algunos colegas. Queríamos comenzar a implementarlo en el sur del país, donde tenemos las 4 especies. Y lo que quería saber es exactamente cuáles serían los contenidos que usted recomendaría para un programa de este tipo, porque a diferencia, digamos, de birdwatching, que está más enfocado en cuestiones taxonómicas y de capturar fotos de las diferentes aves, buenas fotos, en el caso de primates, pues son solo 4 especies, por ejemplo, en Costa Rica, pero nosotros pensábamos adicionarle la parte de educación ambiental, que los visitantes conozcan la historia natural de cada una de esas especies, no solo capturar las fotos, sino saber lo que hacen, por qué viven ahí, cuál es su home range, cuáles son las principales amenazas, cuál es su dieta, etcétera. Entonces estábamos pensando en algo así, digamos, como un día por especie. Entonces, que el turista viva un día con Saimirio stedi, otro día con Ateles geoffroyi, otro día con Zeus imitator, otro día con la otra especie. Y más o menos esa sería nuestra idea, que el turista aprenda la historia natural de esas especies, sus principales amenazas, y sería más o menos un paquete de 4 días, porque son 4 especies, ¿no? Entonces no sé cuáles serían tus recomendaciones para que ese programa sea exitoso.
Bueno, me parece que ya tienes mucho en andamiento, ¿no? Ya está haciendo mucho está pensando por lo menos de mucho que es necesario. Siempre va a ser muy difícil competir con birdwatching, ¿no? Porque hay muchísimas especies de aves, pero los primates son nuestros parientes más cercanos y la gente le gusta. Y la cosa más importante es que sean muy bien habituados, ¿no? Que puede seguir, si quieres quedarse con un grupo de ateles o cebos o saimiri aloata durante varias horas, es posible, ¿no? Más habituado, mejor. Pero ya fui a muchos parques nacionales en Costa Rica. Aprendí mi español en Costa Rica hace 50 años. Y la última vez que estuve en Costa Rica fui a Osa, ¿no? A la península Osa. Y la cantidad de ateles ahí es ridículo. Es increíble. Encontrar un ateles en Amazonía brasileña, por ejemplo, es difícil, ¿no? Allá cada 100, 200 metros hay un grupo completamente habituado de ateles. Entonces, las posibilidades de tener primate watching de calidad en Costa Rica y por que los animales son tan habituados es es realmente fantástico, ¿no? En otros países, por ejemplo, si vas al Congo, vas a ver monos corriendo muy rápido para no ser cazados, ¿no? Entonces es una experiencia completamente diferente. Entonces lo que estás diciendo es exactamente lo que recomendamos.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Ross. Daniela Solano de Costa Rica también quiere decir algo. Pidió la palabra. Adelante.
Buenos días a todos y muchas gracias, Pedro, y los profesores, los doctores, por esta charla. Tengo dos preguntas. Una es, ¿cómo se traduce el éxito, por ejemplo, de que nos contaba el doctor que pudieron hacer una captación de $8 millones, ¿verdad?, para estas especies en su plan de acción? ¿Cómo se traduce eso en el éxito de la conservación de las especies a las que fue dirigido ese dinero? Y después, ¿cuál sería una recomendación para las organizaciones cuando ustedes revisan grants? ¿En qué se enfocan? O sea, si se enfocan en los outputs o la experiencia, o sea, ¿cuáles como los factores más importantes para los revisores de las becas? Y bueno, también agradecer a Global Wildlife Conservation porque acabamos de terminar una beca y expondremos los resultados el viernes. Entonces, también agradecer eso. Pero sí, digamos, a veces hago la primera pregunta porque trabajé con The Nature Conservancy, tuvimos $1 millón para la península de Osa y de repente siento que a veces, viendo estos números, digo, cómo todavía tenemos este montón de problemas con primates, pero yo sé que los esfuerzos que hacemos son honestos, pero no sé si será que los threads son súper más exitosos en conseguir fondos, o cómo, en este caso específico, me gustaría conocer cómo es los resultados o que de estos $8 millones, cómo se tradujo en la conservación de este set de especies. Y bueno, la otra pregunta de qué es lo que miran los granters en las personas que están aplicando para las personas que estamos viendo esto tener como más éxito en la consecución de fondos.
Bueno, yo hago parte de varias fundaciones que dan recursos a conservación de primates y siempre miramos primero qué es el impacto del proyecto para la conservación. No queremos necesariamente solamente proyectos de investigación. Investigación es importante, pero siempre queremos ver si hay un impacto en términos de la conservación. Con este recurso de $8 millones para lémures, estamos todavía esperando los resultados porque los últimos becas fueron entregados hace menos de 6 meses, no, menos de un año ahora, pero estamos con el problema de COVID, especialmente en países como Madagascar, entonces casi todo el trabajo del campo paró, ¿no? Entonces, todavía no podemos evaluar lo que fue hecho con la cantidad en total. Pero eso fue para 112 especies también. Si uno divide $8 millones por 112 especies en un país con muchísimos problemas, es una cantidad relativamente pequeña para cada una de las especies. Pero vamos a ver, dentro de 1 año, 2 años, vamos a tener más información sobre el impacto de este programa en Madagascar. Y si ustedes piensan que tienen problemas en Costa Rica o en América Central en general, tienen que visitar Madagascar para ver qué es realmente problema serio donde hay 90% de la vegetación natural ya desaparecido y 112 especies en áreas de bosque chiquititos en muchos casos. Una cosa que recomiendo mucho es usando los datos que tienen de los planes, del proceso de la lista roja, es la preparación de planes de acción. Y fueron hechos en el pasado varios planes de acción para Mesoamérica, Pero creo que ahora sería interesante preparar un nuevo para la región como un todo y poner estimativos de los costos realistas, ¿no? Si llega con un plan de acción para Mesoamérica, primates de Mesoamérica de $100 millones, no va a ser posible conseguirlo. Pero si llega con un plan de acción muy específico a los primates de unos pocos millones de dólares, es posible que eso sea financiado por varias agencias diferentes. Entonces, un momentico, por favor. Tengo una llamada importante. Anthony, you want to continue responding on that one?
All right, don't worry. Go ahead. Dr. Rylands, I have some questions for you regarding the primate action funds. How can we approach this funding, and what exactly do they focus to accept proposals? Okay, if you can turn on your microphone, Dr. Rylands. Sorry, we didn't hear you.
That's right. There we go.
Thank you.
Hear me now? Yep.
Yes.
No, we try to make it as simple and agile as possible, but there is, of course, bureaucracy. We get the money we get for the Primate Action Fund comes from the Margot Marsh Biodiversity Foundation, and we apply. It's as if I applied for a grant, just as you would apply to the Margot Marsh Biodiversity Foundation for a grant. And they give me a sum each year, and in general, it allows for about 30 to 35 grants of an average of $3,000 averaging, going from 1,000 excuse me, to a maximum of 5,000. And I see the advantage. I mean, we don't put it up on the web, you know, we don't advertise it really, because otherwise we'd be absolutely inundated. And as it's only a relatively few grants, we use word of mouth. I mean, we do tell people, and anybody who writes to me or to Russ or to Ella Outlaw, I think, has been participating in this, because Russ is executive secretary and absolutely fundamental for everything we do with regard to primates. She would be able to send you, or we would be able to send you a copy of the guidelines. It's not a form, just guidelines, which has certain elements in there which are essential for us. And then there's the bureaucracy. What I like to emphasize is that I think with regard to spending money, which is what Daniela, if I understand, was asking, what these little grants will do. The essential thing is, I mean, we can do very little really in any country for any particular species. We can't take them all on and make them major causes. But these small grants, they help master students. It's often a grant of $3,000 or $4,000 sometimes is the make or break for people to do their master students, to do some research, do some surveys. They're small grants, but I think they have a tremendous impact on helping build capacity within the countries of younger people who are coming up and people who want to do a specific project or want to investigate the possibilities of doing a project as a preliminary study and so on. Because the fundamental thing at the end is the community you build within each country. That is, as Ross has recognized so well and been so working so hard at, and the Neotropics have done so well, is to have these primate societies, which gives people a community, gives people a reason, a community to talk to, a reason to, you know, a context, let's say, in which they can work. And it's the people in the country who are going to do it. And as in Brazil, you've got a tremendous amount of students and NGOs, and fundamental as well, you've got people like, at the government organization at the Center for Primate, I can't remember the full name, but it's the government organization which Leandro heads up within the Ministry of the Environment. With those sorts of things in place, government, universities, NGOs, students, keen researchers, that is where the action comes really, because although we we assess the species as a species in its status, the action is on populations, and those populations have to be identified, and it's people in the country and the governments in the country who can work on those, just as you've done so admirably, Pedro, working in Panama with the howler monkeys and the spider monkeys on the Azuero Peninsula. So I take my hat off to you and to other people who set up these societies. Celinda is one who I hope is listening still. Others in Brazil who have helped set up the society there, make it work, and give people a club to join and a community to participate in working for these primates.
Y veo también que Leandro está ahora en el simposio, y Martín Kowalewski también, que acaba de crear una nueva sociedad en Bolivia. Realmente la región neotropical está muy avanzado comparado con los otros continentes en que tienen primates, porque tienen sociedades como la brasileña con más de 40 años de experiencia. Y sería interesante, no sé si hay tiempo ahora, pero Leandro y sus colegas en Brasil tienen mucha experiencia preparando planes de acción dentro del país para ciertas especies o para subregiones en el país como la Mata Atlántica, y en el pasado, no en este gobierno que en Brasil ahora es un poco problemático también, como la nuestra, que felizmente está saliendo. Pero antes el gobierno brasileño también dio mucho apoyo a la implementación de estos programas en el país. Entonces hay una gran posibilidad de intercambio regional dentro de la región neotropical, que no existe en al mismo nivel en los otros continentes. Y también, felizmente, esperamos que vamos a tener nuestro congreso de la Sociedad Internacional de Primatología y SLAPRIM, la Sociedad Latinoamericana de Primatología, en Quito en agosto. Esperamos que hasta agosto tenemos la pandemia más o menos acabado.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Rylands and Dr. Mittermeier. En Mesoamérica estamos iniciando también, y quisiera preguntar qué posibilidades hay de recibir financiamiento, digamos, para training, porque muchos de los científicos mesoamericanos están comenzando y se necesita entrenar. Nosotros en Panamá, por ejemplo, hemos abierto un curso básico de entrenamiento en censos poblacionales de primates no humanos, pero quisiera saber si hay oportunidades de fondos para ese tipo de actividades.
Bueno, siempre hay posibilidades dentro de nuestra capacidad bastante limitada de financiar este tipo de cosas, pero en el pasado hicimos eso. Y Leandro, también tal vez quieres comentar sobre vamos a tener aquí 2 cursos, uno antes y uno después del Congreso en Quito, en que personas de esta región también pueden participar. Leandro, ¿quieres comentar o Celinda?
Olá?
Sí, adelante.
Eu acho que o Leandro está mais a par, mas já foi feita a seleção das pessoas que vão participar, né? Já tinha sido feito porque o evento ia acontecer, né? E agora, como não aconteceu, continuou com a mesma seleção. Acho que foi isso, né, Leandro? Do curso pré-congreso.
Tenemos, bueno, buenas tardes, acá ya en Brasil ya a la tarde, buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Tenemos planeado para el congreso, para el precongreso, tenemos un taller en el que vamos a discutir las evaluaciones de estatus nacionales y los planes de acción nacionales o regionales, ¿no? Entonces la idea es compartir un poco las experiencias que tuvimos en diferentes países latinoamericanos con estas herramientas de planeamiento para la conservación de especies amenazadas, y ver cómo podemos movernos en lo que necesitamos avanzar, qué funcionó, qué no funcionó y qué son las prioridades, regiones que hace tiempo que no tienen un plan estratégico para conservación, como Centroamérica, por ejemplo, hace tiempo, ¿no? que hubo el plan mesoamericano, y otros países que también, como Venezuela, por ejemplo, que necesitan avanzar en ese sentido. Ahora tenemos una posibilidad muy buena con la red boliviana de primatología, que ya está bastante estructurada, pero entonces ahora la idea es avanzar hacia un plan de acción para los primates de Bolivia. Entonces todo esto lo vamos a estar discutiendo en 2 días antes del Congreso, si es que ocurre, ¿no? Y ojalá que sí. Y después tenemos planeado para el post-Congreso un curso, como el que venimos haciendo en otras ocasiones, como el que hicimos en México en el 2012 y en el 2017, un curso para estudiantes de Latinoamérica, diferentes países de Latinoamérica. Son 5 días de campo teórico-práctico, en fin, en el que discutimos varios aspectos de abordajes para la investigación y la conservación de primates en nuestro continente. No sé si Martín quiere complementar, él está bastante al frente de la organización del curso específicamente, no sé si está por ahí.
Gracias. Para introducir o para presentarles a el que estaba hablando, que es Jerusalinsky. Saludos. Él es el presidente de la Sociedad Latinoamericana de Primatología. Y bueno, ahí lo tenemos también en este simposio. Bienvenido y gracias por la participación. Tenemos a Juan Carlos Serio Silva. El doctor Juan Carlos pidió la palabra hace un tiempo y quisiéramos darle la oportunidad. Así que si Juan Carlos estás por allí.
Buena tarde o buen día según el lugar donde se encuentren. Un abrazo, por supuesto, a todos en la audiencia y especialmente al doctor Mittermeier y al doctor Rylands, que son leyendas pues, de la primatología mundial y que todos hemos admirado desde hace muchos años. Y mi reflexión en realidad era muy puntual porque evidentemente tenemos ya información muy relevante que siempre es necesario actualizar sobre el estado de conservación tanto de los monos como de las selvas en muchos lugares. Sin embargo, hay algo que yo sigo viendo que hace falta todavía y es una responsabilidad tanto de las autoridades a nivel internacional, pero principalmente la responsabilidad de nosotros mismos, que es acercarnos a quienes toman las decisiones en cada sitio donde trabajamos. Es decir, los gobiernos locales son realmente quienes pueden tener una influencia directa sobre qué cosas se pueden manejar en favor de la conservación de los monos. Y también necesitamos los primatólogos antiguos, por no decir viejitos, empezar a generar una cultura en los estudiantes que hay una gran responsabilidad de vincularse con el gobierno, pero también con las comunidades locales para darles la información en el lenguaje que ellos además deben comprender más fácilmente. Y finalmente, las organizaciones primatológicas nacionales deberían de estar haciendo su trabajo, especialmente con los gobiernos en la escala más alta. Entonces, falta esa comunicación entre todos estos factores para que realmente todas las evaluaciones puedan tener el impacto que nosotros todos queremos. Muchas gracias.
Muy bien.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan Carlos. Y yo adiciono a eso también que debemos acercarnos a los medios de comunicación, periódico, televisión, radio, porque muchas veces por estos medios es que las personas creen lo que están viviendo y se forman sus ideas. Y si nosotros no actuamos a ese nivel, también estamos perdiendo oportunidad de capacitar y de educar mientras estamos haciendo nuestros esfuerzos de conservación. Así que bueno, yo apoyo la moción del doctor Juan Carlos Serio Silva y me imagino que muchos aquí también lo hacen. No sé si el doctor quiere, doctor Rylands o doctor Mittermeier. We are talking, Dr. Rylands, about the conservation activities together with the government and with the communication, with the media, to have a better impact in the conservation activities. I don't know if you want to comment something, or in any case, Dr. Russell or Doutora Celinda.
Não, eu só queria parabenizar e dizer boa tarde a todos, mas eu queria dizer para o Juan que os planos de ações nacional, pelo menos o brasileiro, né, que todos os primatólogos que fazem parte, eles preveem isso, que as ações, que todas as ações tenham atividades sobre a comunidade local. Pelo menos nos planos de ações que eu participo da Mata Atlântica aqui no Brasil, a gente prevê isso. E todos os anos a gente vê em que pé está, quantos fizeram, o que fizeram, e a gente troca informações em todo o transcurso, justamente que eu montei coisas que o outro não montou, então a gente tenta fazer com que isso tudo chegue de uma maneira muito clara para a população, muito entendível. E é muito legal, porque quando você tem um plano de ação bem conduzido, no Brasil nós estamos tendo excelente, parabéns pelo Leandro, pela equipe lá do CPB, porque a gente está tendo uns planos bem conduzidos e a gente tem conseguido realmente atingir a população local. É muito bom. Então, acho que essa troca de todos da Latinoamérica, da Mesoamérica, essa troca de conhecimento é muito importante para que a gente espelhe aquilo que está dando certo em cada país e traga para o outro e vai assim por diante. Porque tem funcionado muito bem a comunicação com a população local. Quero dar os parabéns ao Ernst, saudades, e ao Rylands também, porque foi muito bom, foi excelente ver vocês falando. Sempre é muito bom ouvir vocês. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado, Zelinda. Que foi que ustedes tenho que ter cuidado agora, vou começar falando português. Pero lo que fue dicho ahora por Juan Carlos y Zelinda es exactamente lo que necesitamos. Y a mí me gusta mucho tener estos intercambios sur-sur entre los primatólogos y otros conservacionistas de los países diferentes, participando en congresos de otros países, ¿no? Por ejemplo, Leandro hace muy bien eso porque está siempre viajando y ayudando en la creación de otras sociedades, pero Pedro y otros líderes de la región mesoamericana, ustedes deben participar también en estos eventos en los otros países, porque este intercambio entre la región neotropical es realmente fantástico. Y a mí me gustaría también tener la presencia de varios de ustedes en congresos en África y en Asia también, porque ellos pueden beneficiar mucho de sus experiencias que en muchos casos son más avanzadas, ¿no? Y tengo, voy a tener que salir dentro de poco tiempo, pero tengo unas pequeñas sugerencias para la región. Primero, hablamos mucho de planes de acción. Creo que es el momento de tener otra vez un plan de acción publicado, no muy grueso, no tiene que ser 100 páginas, pero un plan de acción bien organizado para la región, enfatizando lo que tenemos que hacer para las 19 especies y subespecies diferentes de la región. Segundo, no creo que haya un mini guía, un pocket guide todavía para los primates mesoamericanos. Es muy fácil prepararlo, tenemos los dibujos, tenemos la información, estamos muy dispuestos a ayudar en la producción de un guía de este tipo que puede ser muy útil para el ecoturismo en la región. Y otra cosa, pensando mucho en el futuro, sería interesante tener un congreso de la Sociedad Internacional de Primatología en Mesoamérica. No va a ser en 21 porque va a ser en Ecuador, no va a ser 23 porque va a ser en Malasia, y creo que probablemente, porque tenemos un presidente de la sociedad ahora que viene de Madagascar, probablemente 2025 va a ser Madagascar. Pero quién sabe, 2027 en Panamá, Costa Rica, México, sería muy bienvenido, creo. Entonces, Pedro y otros ahí de la región que les gustan pensar grande, yo creo que deben estar pensando en esta posibilidad para el futuro, en esta década por lo menos, ¿no?
Por supuesto, doctor Rylands, doctor Mittermeier, sorry. Estamos haciendo fuerza en Mesoamérica para tener algo más organizado. Hemos estado haciendo bastante unión con los países mesoamericanos y hay algunas personas que ya se han acercado a nosotros de Honduras, de Guatemala, para unificar también criterios. Y bueno, eso está en mente y esperemos que para cuando se pueda, Panamá sea la sede de ese próximo congreso. Lo vamos a tomar muy en cuenta y si no, cualquiera de nuestros países hermanos. Así que muchísimas gracias, doctor Rylands, doctor Mittermeier, sorry, y doctor Rylands también. No sé si alguien quiere hablar alguna cosita más antes de despedirnos, pues sabemos que los panelistas están cansados, los ponentes. If you want to say something else just before ending the meeting, that will be great. I know you are busy and you are tired probably. So just feel anything you want to say before the close the meeting.
For my part, I'd like to say that Primate Action Fund has financed or helped finance a lot of student courses, field courses. And you don't need that much money to organize a small field course. And so we're available for anybody who's trying to organize, who's organizing field courses. We can help. It wouldn't be all the money perhaps, but we can certainly help. We've done these in Peru, in Brazil, in Suriname, in Madagascar, and I think in Colombia, and so on. But just to end, as you say, thank you, Pedro, and this has been a great honor and extremely interesting and fruitful on my part as well to see this community who are so active and doing so well in saving our primate heritage. So thank you, Pedro, for inviting me, and thank you to all those who've had the patience to listen.
Thank you, Dr. Rylands. It has been an honor, and thank you for all your support with Margot Marsh Foundation, Primate Action Funds, and other institutions that have been helping together with you, both of you, that I know that you are in behind. And also, Dr. Mittermeier, if you want to say something.
Bueno, quiero primero agradecer también la invitación y felicitar a todos ustedes y muy especialmente a Pedro por la organización de este evento muy importante. Como siempre digo, estamos dispuestos a ayudar en la creación, en la fortaleciendo la comunidad de primatólogos en su región dentro de nuestras posibilidades. Entonces, cualquier cosa que necesitan, entren en contacto con nosotros y muy especialmente ahora con la reorganización de este grupo de especialistas de primates para el nuevo cuadrenio. Esperamos tener más miembros de esta región para un futuro muy productivo. Una vez más, muchas gracias.